The Sentinel Corps was Earth's finest military unit, made up of the toughest, most skilled humans to ever walk the galaxy. These Deathworlders had earned their reputation through generations of survival on a planet filled with dangers at every turn. On Earth, survival wasn't just about strength. It was about being able to face the harshest conditions, adapt, and overcome. The Sentinel Corps had been trained for this very purpose, to protect and defend weaker species who couldn't fight for themselves. Captain Alina Voss, the leader of the Sentinel Corps, sat in the control room of the flagship, the Resolute, studying the distress signal from Cynthia. She had seen plenty of trouble in her time. Alien invasions, planetary disasters, and wars. But this was different. The Xynthians were on the brink of extinction, and their enemies, the Thrakari, were vicious. If the Deathworlders didn't intervene, the Xynthians would be wiped out. "Captain, we've confirmed the location of the distress signal," said Lieutenant Marco, one of Voss's most trusted officers. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of tension in it. Even he knew how dangerous the situation was. Captain Voss nodded, her expression serious. "Prepare the team. We leave in 1 hour." The Sentinel Corps team members quickly began their preparations. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were highly trained in hand-to-hand combat, advanced weaponry, survival tactics, and alien diplomacy. They had faced dangerous situations before, but this mission would be unlike any they had ever encountered. Not only were they going to fight against the Thrakari, but they would also need to learn how to help a species on the verge of collapse. The humans quickly suited up in their advanced armor, which was designed to protect them against even the deadliest attacks. Their weapons were equally impressive, from energy rifles capable of piercing the toughest armor to handheld plasma blades that could slice through almost anything. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, built to withstand the harshest environments, just like the humans who wore them. "We're going to have to move fast," Captain Voss said to the team as they gathered in the briefing room. "The Thrakari won't give up easily, and we don't know how much time the Xynthians have left. Our mission is twofold. First, we save them from the plague and the Thrakari. Second, we need to teach them how to fight back. We won't let them fall." The team nodded in agreement, each member ready to take on the challenge. They had fought together many times before, and they knew the risks. But the thought of helping a species on the brink of destruction, especially one so vulnerable, gave them a sense of purpose. They weren't just soldiers. They were the last hope for the Xynthians. The ship's engines roared to life, and the Resolute began its journey through deep space, headed straight for Xynthia. As they traveled through the vast emptiness of the galaxy, Captain Voss looked out of the window, her thoughts focused on the task ahead. It was hard to imagine what kind of world they were flying to. A peaceful, fragile species, fighting for survival. The odds were stacked against them, but the Deathworlders never backed down. Captain Voss turned to her team. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The Sentinel Corps had faced countless enemies, but nothing could prepare them for what lay ahead on Xynthia. They were about to meet a species in desperate need of salvation, and they would stop at nothing to ensure the Xynthians didn't fade into history. The Sentinel Corps had already been through countless battles, but this mission was unlike any they had faced before. As the Resolute sped through the dark void of space, heading towards the distant planet Cynthia, the crew felt the weight of their mission pressing on them. Captain Alina Voss stood at the front of the command room, staring at the large holographic map of the galaxy. The path to Cynthia was filled with unknown dangers, and they had no idea what they would find when they arrived. "We have to pass through the Thrakari-controlled sector," said Lieutenant Marco, his voice filled with concern. The Thrakari had a powerful fleet, and their territory was littered with space mines and patrol ships. The Sentinel Corps couldn't afford to be caught by surprise. Captain Voss nodded. She had fought in many space battles, and knew that the Thrakari would be expecting them. They wouldn't let a ship from Earth pass through their space without trying to stop it. "We'll have to be quick and quiet. Get ready for some turbulence," she ordered. The crew of the Resolute knew better than to question their captain's commands. They were ready for anything. As they entered the Thrakeri sector, the tension in the air was thick. The ship's sensors picked up signs of Thrakeri patrols, and the crew prepared for the worst. Every member of the Sentinel Corps was on high alert, their hands close to their weapons, eyes scanning every corner of the ship. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the command room. The sensor systems detected multiple enemy ships closing in. The Thrakeri had found them. Captain Voss didn't hesitate. "All hands, prepare for battle," she shouted. The crew scrambled to their stations, their training kicking in. The ship's defense shields activated, and the engines powered up to full speed. The Resolute wasn't a warship, but it was fast and maneuverable, built to survive the harshest conditions. The Thrakeri ships appeared on their screens, massive and threatening. They had already locked on to the Resolute, and the first wave of energy blasts streaked through space toward them. But Captain Voss was ready. With a series of sharp commands, she ordered evasive maneuvers, and the ship swerved just in time to avoid the first round of fire. "Return fire," she commanded, and the Resolute's weapons unleashed a volley of high-powered energy blasts. The Thrakeri ships were strong, but the Deathworlders had learned how to fight smart. They aimed for weak points, striking at the enemy's engines and weapon systems. It wasn't long before one of the Thrakeri ships exploded in a burst of light, sending debris flying into space. But there were more ships, and the battle wasn't over. The Resolute dodged, ducked, and weaved through the enemy fire, narrowly avoiding destruction. The crew worked together flawlessly, each member doing their part to keep the ship intact and keep fighting. Finally, after what felt like hours, the Thrakeri ships began to retreat. They had underestimated the Sentinel Corps and their determination. The enemy was tough, but the Deathworlders were tougher. Captain Voss let out a breath of relief as the threat passed. "Good work, everyone," she said, her voice calm but filled with pride. "Now let's get to Xynthia. We've got a world to save." The crew nodded, knowing that their journey was far from over. They had proven their skills in battle, but the real challenge awaited them on Xynthia. The Thrakeri were only the first of many obstacles they would face, and the Sentinel Corps was ready for whatever came next. The Resolute dropped out of hyperspace, and the crew found themselves staring at the ruined planet below. Xynthia, once a world of lush forests and shining cities, now appeared as little more than a wasteland. The atmosphere was clouded with smoke from burning buildings, and the surface was dotted with craters and destruction. From space, it looked like a world on the edge of collapse. Captain Alina Voss stared at the planet's surface, her face hard with determination. "Prepare for landing," she ordered. The crew had seen plenty of devastated worlds, but this one hit different. The Xynthians were a peaceful people, not used to fighting. They relied on their advanced technology to keep them safe, but against the Thrakeri, it wasn't enough. Now, they were paying the price. As the Resolute descended through the thick atmosphere, the crew could see more details. Xynthian cities, once shining examples of civilization, were now in ruins. Buildings that had once reached for the sky were now toppled, their metal frames twisted and broken. The streets were empty, and there was no sign of life. But the distress signal was still active. The Xynthians were still holding on, but just barely. The landing zone was a cleared area near one of the last remaining Xynthian strongholds. As the ship touched down, the crew quickly moved into action. Their mission was clear: help the Xynthians fight the plague and the Thrakeri. But it was not going to be easy. Captain Voss led the team off the ship, her boots crunching on the dry, cracked earth. The air smelled of smoke and decay. The wind carried the scent of something worse, something alien. The plague was already here, and it was spreading. "We need to find the Xynthian leadership," Voss said, scanning the horizon. "They're our best chance at figuring out how to stop this." Lieutenant Marco, who had been studying the planet's surface from the ship, spoke up. "Captain, we've detected movement nearby. It looks like a small group of Xinthians. They're coming toward us. Voss nodded. Let's make contact. Stay alert. The group moved cautiously toward the signal. They didn't know what to expect, but the Xinthians had been desperate for help, and they needed to know where to start. As they approached, a group of Xinthians appeared in the distance, their faces pale and weary. They were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, fragile, with delicate skin and wide, expressive eyes. Their bodies were thin, and they moved slowly, as if the weight of the plague was bearing down on them. One of the Xinthians, an older male with silver-gray hair, stepped forward. He was wearing a tattered uniform and held a device in his hands. "You've come," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with hope. "We never thought anyone would hear our call." Captain Voss stepped forward. "We're here to help, but we need to know everything you can tell us about the plague. We're going to stop it." The Xinthian looked at her with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "It's a virus. It attacks our bodies, weakens us, but leaves our minds intact. Our scientists, they were working on a cure, but the Thrakeri destroyed our labs. We have nothing left." Voss clenched her fists. The Thrakeri had not only attacked the Xinthians physically, they had taken away their hope. "We'll figure it out," she said. "But first, we need to secure this area. You're not safe here. The Thrakeri will come for you again." The Xinthians nodded, their eyes filled with fear and exhaustion. It was clear they had been fighting for survival for far too long. But now, they had something new, hope, and Captain Voss and the Sentinel Corps were determined to make sure they didn't lose it. As the humans and Xinthians made their way toward the stronghold, the weight of their mission hung heavily in the air. The Deathworlders had come to save them, but the battle for Xinthia was. The stronghold where the remaining Xinthian leaders had taken refuge was a small, heavily guarded compound. It had once been a research facility, but now it was a fortress surrounded by walls, a last line of defense against the Thrakeri invaders. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, but the Sentinel Corps moved through it with purpose. Their mission was clear: protect the Xinthians, stop the plague, and fight back against the Thrakeri. Captain Voss led her team into the stronghold, her boots making little noise on the cracked concrete. The Xinthians had given them what little information they had, and now it was time for action. They needed to take the fight to the Thrakeri and prevent them from destroying what was left of Xinthia. As they entered the command room, Voss addressed her team. "We don't have much time. The Thrakeri will be back soon. We need to figure out how to contain the virus and hit the Thrakeri where it hurts. Any ideas?" Lieutenant Marco, ever the strategist, stepped forward. "We know the Thrakeri are using advanced technology to track Xinthian movements. If we can take out their communications relay, it'll buy us some time. We could also send a signal to their ships, causing confusion." Voss nodded. "Sounds good. You and Surgeon Hayes will lead that operation. The rest of us will focus on the Thrakeri ground forces. We'll take them head-on." The team split into two groups. Marco and Hayes gathered their gear, preparing for a stealth mission to sabotage the Thrakeri communication system. The rest of the team would stay behind to hold the stronghold and defend it from any incoming attacks. As they moved toward their respective tasks, the tension in the air grew. Everyone knew the Thrakeri weren't far away, and if they didn't act quickly, they would be overrun. The Xinthians, though grateful, were too weak to fight back. It was up to the Sentinel Corps to turn the tide. Meanwhile, outside, the sky darkened as enemy ships appeared on the horizon. The Thrakeri were coming, and they were bringing reinforcements. Captain Voss looked up at the ships, her jaw tightening. She had faced worse odds before, but today felt different. The Xinthians were depending on them, and failure was not an option. "Let's move," Voss commanded, leading her team toward the outer wall of the stronghold. "We fight for Xinthia. We fight for the future." The Sentinel Corps moved out, weapons at the ready. The first wave of Thrakeri soldiers landed just outside the stronghold, their heavy boots thudding against the ground. They were armored and armed to the teeth, their advanced weaponry crackling with energy. But the Deathworlders were not afraid. They had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, and they had always come out on top. The first shots rang out, loud and piercing. The Thrakeri fired on sight, but the Sentinel Corps was already on the move. Voss ducked behind cover, her energy rifle blasting back at the enemy. Her team followed her lead, taking down Thrakeri soldiers one by one with precision and speed. The Sentinel Corps moved like a well-oiled machine, their teamwork and tactics overwhelming the enemy. As the battle raged outside, Marco and Hayes reached their target. The Thrakeri communications relay was heavily guarded, but they had trained for this. With quick and quiet movements, they disabled the relay, sending a wave of confusion through the Thrakeri ranks. The tide was turning. The Thrakeri, once so confident in their victory, now found themselves fighting an enemy they hadn't prepared for. The Sentinel Corps had arrived, and they were not going to let Cynthia fall. The battle outside the stronghold was fierce. Thrakeri soldiers, clad in heavy armor, charged forward with brutal force, their weapons sending blasts of energy into the walls of the compound. But the Sentinel Corps fought with the determination of warriors who had never known defeat. The Deathworlders moved with precision, their movements sharp and calculated, striking back with unrelenting speed. Captain Voss led the charge, her rifle blasting energy bolts at the advancing enemy. She didn't hesitate. Each shot was aimed with deadly accuracy, knocking down Thrakeri one after another. She had been through countless battles, but something about this fight felt different. It wasn't just about winning. It was about saving a species on the brink of extinction. "Keep them back," Voss shouted to her team as they took cover behind the wreckage of a fallen building. The Thrakeri were relentless, but the Sentinel Corps was more than a match for them. The team moved in sync, covering each other, ensuring that no one was left behind. Sergeant Hayes, a tall and muscular soldier, fired his plasma rifle at a Thrakeri soldier attempting to flank them. The enemy soldier went down with a single shot, his heavy armor useless against the powerful blast. "We've got them on the run," Hayes said, his voice calm but determined. "Don't get too confident," Voss replied, keeping her eyes on the battlefield. "They'll call for reinforcements soon enough. We need to finish this quickly." The sound of explosions filled the air as Thrakeri grenades went off in the distance. The enemy was starting to realize that they were outmatched. They had underestimated the Sentinel Corps, and now they were paying the price. Meanwhile, Marco and Lieutenant Hayes, who had been on the sabotage mission, returned to the battlefield after successfully disabling the Thrakeri communications relay. The Sentinel Corps had thrown the Thrakeri into disarray, causing confusion among their ranks. "We took out their comms," Marco reported as he rejoined the team. "They're disorganized. We've got a real chance now." Voss nodded. "Good work, Marco. Let's finish this." The Thrakeri soldiers, now confused and scattered, began to retreat. The Sentinel Corps pushed forward, forcing them back and reclaiming territory one block at a time. The tide had turned. The Xinthians had a fighting chance. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, a new threat emerged. A massive Thrakeri war machine, larger than any the Sentinel Corps had seen, appeared on the horizon. It was heavily armored, with weapons that could decimate entire buildings in seconds. The Sentinel Corps had fought battles on the ground, but this would be a different challenge entirely. "Take cover," Voss yelled, as the ground shook with the force of the war machine's steps. It was armed with energy cannons and plasma turrets, and it was heading straight for the stronghold. The Sentinel Corps had faced overwhelming odds before, but this was something new. The war machine was a giant, and it would take everything they had to stop it. But Captain Voss wasn't one to back down from a fight. If anything, this only fueled her determination. "Everyone, focus fire on that thing. We need to bring it down before it gets any closer," she ordered. The Sentinel Corps spread out, setting up positions to flank the war machine. They fired everything they had: plasma rifles, grenades, and even anti-tank weapons. But the Thrakari war machine shrugged off the attacks, its armor nearly impervious to their weapons. "Get to the weak points," Voss shouted. She knew they didn't have much time before the war machine reached the stronghold. With a roar, the war machine unleashed a volley of plasma fire, forcing the Sentinel Corps to retreat behind cover. The battle was far from over, and the toughest fight was yet to come. The ground trembled beneath the Sentinel Corps as the massive Thrakari war machine advanced, its armored legs stomping toward the stronghold. The war machine was a terrifying sight, its dark metal surface gleaming in the dim light of Cynthia's fading sun, and its massive weapons aimed directly at the Sentinel Corps. The battle had already been hard, but this was the fight that would decide everything. Captain Voss crouched behind cover, her rifle aimed at the war machine's weak points. The Sentinel Corps had fought enemies before, but this was something different. The machine was built for destruction, with thick armor and firepower that could easily wipe out entire platoons. If they didn't take it down soon, the stronghold and everyone in it would be finished. "Focus fire on its joints," Voss ordered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. The crew had faced overwhelming odds before, but today felt different. There was no room for failure. "We need to disable its movement before it reaches us." Lieutenant Marco and Sergeant Hayes fired their plasma rifles at the war machine's massive legs, hoping to pierce the armor and stop it in its tracks, but each shot seemed to bounce off, leaving no noticeable damage. The Thrakari war machine was tough, built to endure the worst attacks. "We're not getting through," Marco shouted, frustration in his voice. The shots were having no effect, and the war machine was closing in faster. Voss didn't hesitate. "Get to the underside. We need to hit the power core." The Sentinel Corps moved quickly, taking cover as the war machine fired again. The blast missed them by inches, but it was a clear warning. Time was running out. They had to find a way to bring this monster down. Sergeant Hayes, ever resourceful, motioned for a small team to follow him. "We'll climb up from the back. If we can get inside, we might be able to target the core directly." Voss nodded. "Go. Be quick." Hayes and his team darted for the war machine's rear, using the surrounding wreckage for cover. The massive machine's attention was focused on the rest of the Sentinel Corps, giving them the chance they needed to approach undetected. Once they reached the vac, Hayes ordered his team to climb up, using grappling hooks and ladders to scale the war machine's steep sides. As they reached the top, Hayes signaled for everyone to stay low. The weak points Voss had mentioned were on the underside, where the power core was located. They needed to plant explosive charges there to disable it. One of the soldiers, Private Rivas, set the charges in place, making sure everything was ready. "Charges are set," he said. "We've got about a minute before detonation." But just as they were about to retreat, the war machine's main cannon fired again, sending a wave of energy blasting in their direction. Rivas was knocked off his feet, the explosion sending him flying backward. "Rivas," Hayes shouted, but there was no time to check. They had to finish the job. "Fall back." The team quickly climbed down, running as fast as they could toward the safety of the stronghold. The war machine, distracted by their attack, hadn't noticed them retreating. Back at the stronghold, Voss and the rest of the Sentinel Corps kept the Thrakari ground forces occupied. They could hear the rumble of the war machine's advance, and the tension was unbearable. Everyone knew the final blow was about to come. The seconds ticked by, and then, with a deafening explosion, the war machine's power core detonated. The massive machine staggered, smoke billowing from its exposed insides. The Sentinel Corps had succeeded. The giant that threatened to wipe them all out was falling apart. Voss raised her rifle and fired at the remaining Thrakari soldiers. The war machine's destruction had shaken them, and they were beginning to retreat. The Sentinel Corps took full advantage of the moment, pushing the Thrakari back, inch by inch. "We've got them on the ropes," Marco called out, his voice filled with relief. "Let's finish this." With the war machine out of the picture, the Sentinel Corps rallied. The Thrakeri, now disoriented and in retreat, stood no chance against the united might of humanity. Captain Voss watched as the enemy forces crumbled. It wasn't over yet, but this was the beginning of the end. The Sentinel Corps had come to save Cynthia, and now victory was within their grasp. The Sentinel Corps stood in the midst of the battlefield, watching as the last of the Thrakeri forces scattered into the distance. The war machine had been destroyed, and with it, the Thrakeri's hold over Cynthia had crumbled. Smoke still rose from the ruins, but for the first time in what felt like forever, the Cynthians had hope. Captain Voss surveyed the battlefield, her expression hard but filled with a sense of victory. The Sentinel Corps had done their job. The Thrakeri invaders had been pushed back, and the Cynthians were safe. For now. But the mission wasn't over yet. The Cynthians were still battling the plague, and there was much more work to be done. "We've won the fight, but we're not done yet," Voss said, her voice steady. "We need to find a cure for the plague, and we need to make sure the Thrakeri don't come back." Lieutenant Marco, standing nearby, nodded. "Agreed. But we've gained the time we needed. The Thrakeri won't be back in force for a while. Now it's up to the Cynthians to rebuild." The group began to gather their gear, preparing to head into the heart of the Cynthian stronghold. There, the Cynthian leadership was waiting. They had the knowledge and the technology to create a cure, but their resources had been severely depleted by the invasion. The Sentinel Corps had given them the breathing room they needed. Now it was time to help them finish what they had started. As they walked through the stronghold's gates, Captain Voss was met by the same elderly Cynthian who had first greeted them upon landing. His face was tired, but there was a spark of gratitude in his eyes. "You've saved us," the Cynthian said, his voice filled with emotion. "We thought it was the end. But now, thanks to you, we have a chance to heal." Voss nodded. "We're not done yet. We'll help you get back on your feet. You're not alone anymore." The Cynthian's eyes glistened with unused tears. "You've given us more than just time. You've given us hope. That's something we haven't had for a long time." In the heart of the stronghold, the Cynthian scientists were already hard at work, analyzing the virus and looking for a cure. Their lab had been destroyed in the Thrakeri invasion, but they had salvaged what they could, and with the Sentinel Corps help, they were now making progress. Dr. Elara, the lead scientist, greeted Voss and the team. "We've discovered that the virus is not just biological. It's being enhanced by Thrakeri technology. We're close to finding a solution." Voss listened closely. "So if we remove the Thrakeri influence, you can stop the virus." "That's the theory," Dr. Elara confirmed. "But we need to disable the technology that's boosting the virus. We'll need your help to find and destroy the Thrakeri's remaining labs." Voss considered the situation. "We've already hit them hard, but if this is what it takes to save your people, we're in." Dr. Elara smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "You don't know how much this means to us." The Sentinel Corps knew that the final push was still ahead of them. They had defeated the Thrakeri on the battlefield, but the war wasn't over. The Thrakeri's technological influence still lingered, and they needed to remove it once and for all. Captain Voss looked out at the horizon, where the last rays of the sun were fading. "We've come this far. We won't stop until Cynthia is free." The Sentinel Corps was ready. The battle was still raging, but they had proven that, no matter the odds, humanity would always fight for the future. The final battle was upon them. The Sentinel Corps had pushed the Thrakeri forces back, and now, with the Cynthians' hope renewed, it was time to end the war for good. Captain Voss and her team had fought hard, but the Thrakeri were not going to give up easily. They still had one last weapon, a hidden lab deep inside the Cynthian mountains, where they were enhancing the plague with even more advanced technology. "We've got one chance to end this," Voss said as she stood before her team. "The lab is deep inside Thrakeri-controlled territory. It won't be easy, but we know what we're up against. We've faced worse. We need to destroy that lab, and we need to do it now." Lieutenant Marco nodded, his face hard. "We've come this far. There's no turning back." Sergeant Hayes, always ready for a challenge, grinned. "Time to finish what we started." The plan was set. The Sentinel Corps would infiltrate the lab, disable the Thrakeri technology, and destroy the virus once and for all. The journey would be dangerous, but they had the element of surprise. The Thrakeri were still recovering from their losses, and the Sentinel Corps would strike hard and fast. They made their way to the lab in a small transport vehicle, keeping low and avoiding the Thrakeri patrols. As they neared the mountain range, the tension grew. The Xinthians had told them the lab was buried deep underground, protected by layers of security. But the Sentinel Corps had never backed down from a challenge, and this would be no different. "We're almost there," Voss said as she peered through the window. The landscape was rugged, the mountain peaks towering above them. "Stay sharp. This is where things get serious." The vehicle stopped at the foot of the mountain, and the team disembarked. They moved quickly, using the terrain to their advantage. The mountains were harsh, but they provided cover from the Thrakeri's watchful eyes. It wasn't long before they reached the entrance to the hidden lab, an old mining shaft, now repurposed for Thrakeri use. The entrance was guarded, but the Sentinel Corps had a plan. They took out the guards swiftly and silently, ensuring no alarm was raised. Inside, the lab was a maze of metal corridors, humming with the sound of advanced technology. The air was thick with tension, but Voss led her team forward, determined to finish the mission. They reached the central chamber, where the Thrakeri's technology was amplifying the virus. It was a massive room filled with machines, wires, and glowing energy conduits. At the heart of it all was a central control panel, where a Thrakeri technician was monitoring the progress of the virus. "Take him out," Voss ordered. Hayes moved swiftly, taking down the technician with a single shot. The room fell silent. "Time to shut this down," Marco said as he worked on the control panel. He quickly accessed the system, bypassing security protocols. "We've got about 5 minutes before the system reboots. We need to destroy everything now." Voss nodded. "Set the charges. Make it quick." The team planted explosives around the room, targeting the core systems. As they prepared to leave, an alarm suddenly blared, echoing through the lab. The Thrakeri had detected their presence. "Move! Move!" Voss shouted, leading the team out of the lab. The sound of Thrakeri soldiers rushing toward them filled the air. The Sentinel Corps fought their way back to the surface, their weapons blazing as they made their escape. The explosion from the charges rattled the mountain, and a massive cloud of smoke and dust rose behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached the transport vehicle, and they quickly sped away. As they looked back at the collapsing lab, Voss allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The plague was over. The Thrakeri's control over Xinthia was broken. "We did it," Marco said, his voice full of exhaustion but satisfaction. Voss glanced at her team, each of them battered but alive. "Yeah, we did. But this isn't just a victory for us. It's a victory for the Xinthians. They have a future now." As the transport sped off into the distance, the Sentinel Corps knew that the war was over. They had saved a planet, and in doing so, had proven once again that humanity's will to fight could overcome anything. Xinthia was free, and the Sentinel Corps had given its people a chance to rebuild.